Good morning, all. Hello. Right, it's me. I'm back. Okay, so when I say I'm back, I had a bad throat yesterday, so I couldn't speak. That's the only reason you didn't hear me whinging and moaning. Right, so some of you will already know of Dr. Heather Brunskell-Evans, who has written quite eloquently about some of the problems involved in the TQ plus nuttery. So I want to point you in the direction of an excellent article that has been written by Heather, the links of which are in the doobers as usual, that has been written by Heather, which it is worthwhile you reading and giving some consideration to. What it relates to is what's called the Cass Review. Now, for those of you that are unfamiliar with the Cass Review, Dr. Hilary Cass, who is a consultant paediatrician, an eminent one it might be added, was asked by NHS England, commissioned in fact, to carry out an independent review of the Tavistock NHS Hospital Trust Gender Identity Development Service, which, if you recall, was closed down due to its failures, including, of course, the homophobic nature of gender identity ideology. We've now got a situation where her interim report came out, and some of us were just, in some way relieved about that. Now, I'm not going to go through Heather's argument because she eloquently says what she needs to, and I think it's important that you read it. However, what I will do is comment on a couple of bits. Let me hydrate a bit of a throat. We'll see. As pointed out by Heather, there's a need to cast a somewhat dark shadow over the celebratory mood that came after the Cass interim report. I have already made my feelings clear about this in a previous video, in that I felt that if we were not very careful, the religiosity and the cultish nature of gender identity ideology would in fact manage to keep its claws firmly embedded in everything. Because what you are dealing with is a belief system, and people don't like to give them up. So I'm not happy to see that Heather has in fact echoed some of the concerns that I previously mentioned. I imagine you will not be either. So I'll just pick a couple of things that Heather is speaking about here, in that she's going to she looks at two general observations about the interim report. The first one being, and I think one of the most important, is that Cass stated quite clearly that social transition is iatrogenic, i.e. it causes harm. It is the problem. It is the problem. And I am absolutely in agreement with that. I think social transition is the first part of a process and a journey that is then very hard for any young individual who's done so to turn around and say, I don't want to do this. And I think that's, in my mind, it is the single biggest threat, along with the non-binary nonsense, to young people, particularly gay, lesbian, autistic, looked after children, and children with ADHD or in distress. So what Heather is asking here is that when they set up these new regional centres, which they're going to set up, they've now said that they wish to keep young children and families central to their approach. Well, and rightly so. Heather is asking, well, what does that mean? What is it? What, the belief systems? They're going to start doing, health by belief, which we know is what's happening. So Heather is concerned about that, and I think we should be too. It's one for discussion. So does that mean that all of the stuff that comes behind this, queer theory, gender identity ideology, the foul work of money, Benjamin and their cronies, so if a parent believes in all that, what are they going to do? What are they going to do? How are they going to stop it from happening? I had a conversation on Facebook with a few people yesterday, and one of them was a health worker who believes that gender is formed by 4 years old. By 4 years old. I think it's possible that we have to be very careful about this, because I think it's possible that Cass isn't going to do what we think he's going to do. Which means we have to keep up the pressure. I mean, much stronger pressure. We need government to intervene at this point. The underpinnings of this by postmodernism, queer theory, and the works of the likes of mermaids and gender intelligence and GIDS itself. It's unfortunate that the that the Cass Review is saying that they are going to be involving GIDS in this new service in terms of getting it together. They talk about training. I'm not convinced that training will be a training that is able to distinguish between the lunatic, cultish nature of some of this and the actual reality of the situation. For example, groups mentioned here are mermaids and gendered intelligence, which we all know well. And it's worrying that we may be in a situation where we're starting to think that gender identity is inherent and immutable in children, when in fact it is a made-up concept from the 1950s. There is a second observation, and Cass has stated that there is some linguistic confusion in her interim report. More clarity would help to move away from artificial binary opposition. This is the bit that worries me the most. Artificial binary opposition from exploratory and affirmative approaches, and break down the ideological tensions. Now, Cass said originally that this was only going to be about the medical side of it, and it wasn't going to be about the wider societal problems with this infection, this cultist infection that is moving through our culture. And yet what we appear to have here, and I'm saying appear deliberately because I don't want to say this, I'm right. I'm saying to you, you need to look at this and consider it. Is that she's asking for, Cass is saying that there is some linguistic confusion. More clarity would help to move away from artificial binary opposition. This is not an artificial binary opposition, Cass. This is not. Right? If you look at the history of eugenics, which is, I think, the closest movement to this, you will see it was advertised in papers. There were eugenics clubs. Everybody thought it was a great idea. Right? And then suddenly it disappeared when they discovered the entire thing was based on a bed of nothing. Cod science, just like this. Nothing. Heather then pulls out that there are many people within the NHS who have a vested interest in this. There's lots of money in this, folks. So even right from the top, the example of Dr. Michael Brady, the government's national advisor for LGBT health, has consistently given thanks to mermaids for their support. What the hell for? This is embedded in our NHS. This is the problem that I think Cass is going to face, and I imagine that there are more than a few of them banging her head about it when they get anywhere near her. Right? I don't think the Cass review is going to be enough, and I think what we need is a full review of this situation, which must be done with urgency. And that should be made up of people who are scientists and not believers. So Cass now proposes, as Heather says, a number of substantive changes to the interim report, two of which are the following. First, after consultation, she now realises that references to social transition are a cause for concern. She had originally claimed that to facilitate social transition is not a neutral act and can have a significant impact on children's psychological functions. She is now keen to reassure that the comment on social transition is not a statement about wider society, and that the regional centres will not impose any such view. Right, now, this is a difficult sentence, right? And I ought to talk to Heather about it, really, but this is a difficult sentence. I'm sure Heather's having a look at this because I've sent it to her. Heather, I'm struggling with this one, right? So she had originally claimed that to facilitate social transition is not a neutral act and can have a significant impact on children's psychological function, which was the bit that probably you and I, Heather, found the most interesting, was that we now know that, I mean, I knew it beforehand, and I'm sure you did, but most people do know that social transition is an iatrogenic process. It's dangerous. And now she is keen to reassure that the comment on social transition is not a statement about wider societies, and that the regional centres will not impose any such view. Right, she then says that the decision about social transition will be individual, and the agency to make them will ultimately rest with the young person along with their family or carers. However, where there is any clinical involvement with the decision-making process about social transition, the risks and benefits will be discussed carefully, referencing best available evidence. There's something here. This is an incredibly nuanced statement, I think, Heather. And I think it's a political one rather than a medical one. I think what it could be here is that what they're saying is, if somebody's 18 and they want to socially transition, that's their business. If they want to send themselves down a pathway of madness, that's their business, right? Because they're 18, right? Okay, that's up to them. Would I do everything I could to dissuade them? Bloody right. Would I do everything I could to disrupt that narrative if I met them? Bloody right. But they're 18. They can do what they like, right? What they can't do is get surgery on the NHS, in my mind. End of story. No, not paying for it, okay? But what I'm seeing here, I think, Heather, is an attempt to perhaps not cause the Cass review itself to look like it's going beyond 17. I do hope that makes sense. i.e. that it's not attempting to dictate to adults what they should do with their lives. I'm thinking that might be what that means. Again, I could be bloody wrong, and Heather's far smarter than I am when it comes to this stuff, but I think that's what it might mean. The consultation will no doubt have heard from parents, as is noted here, and I'm sure they will. But this idea of the transgender identity, which is a mythology, is something that obviously is very worrying. I still think it's an intellectual problem, not a medical one. Now, Cass also now states that appropriate training and development initiatives are available to support the existing workforce. If the regional centres are to be embedded within a broader child and adolescent health context, this leaves open the issue of which providers will be deemed capable of delivering such training, and it also begs the questions of which gender specialists will be chosen from the existing workforce. Now, what this second major worry here from Heather, is that you're going to end up with the people from GIDS running the show. How can they prevent what happened at the Tavistock? Heather's nub of Heather's argument. What is the problem? What is it possible for regional centres to be independent of the nonsense belief systems of these people, these queer and trans medical activists, if they're going to involve them? It says we're going to include stakeholders with LGBT experience. Well, they're using LGBT. The Cash Review is forced teaming gay people with the believers and those with a mental condition. It's not on. So go read it, right? Okay, I'm not going to rub it onto you all day about this, but I would say that we have a situation where the Cash Review is doing what I was really concerned that people are doing, and what I'm beginning to see elsewhere is that you are both siding something that doesn't have both sides. There aren't two sides. It is a thing, a parasitic, cancerous problem in culture and across our wider society. And you do not negotiate with it. You eradicate it. Right? That's what concerns me the most. Now, people will say to me, yeah, but you're an extremist blowhard. Well, fine. I might be an extremist blowhard, and I don't care, right? What I care about is young gay children. That's what I care about, right? I care about them being screwed up by these lunatics. From my perspective, there aren't two sides, and I don't know why some people think there are. There aren't. And also, there is no field for psychology in this. Right? Setting up separate groups that will help you with your gender identity. We have to start by saying gender identity does not exist. That's what we start with, because it doesn't. It was a made-up fantasy in the mind of a bloody bloke who got two young kids to fiddle with each other sexually while he made notes. It's a great piece, Heather, just to be, a little bit more upbeat. And I am cautious about Cass, and that one thing that you said that I explained that I thought, could this be what she's attempting to do is to prevent the growth of the Cash Review. I think separate from the Cash Review, we need a full public inquiry into the activities of Stonewall, Mermaids, GIDS, WPATH and every other absolute nutcase that has got themselves involved in this and pushed it. The LGBT Foundation, Manchester Pride, every so-called LGBT PSHE school teaching group that are currently indoctrinating children into this absolute rubbish. We need a full investigation, and it should be headed up by somebody with fire and fervour to eradicate from society what is essentially the sparrows from Game of Thrones. That's where I'm at. Now, you may not be there, but that's what I've got to. I watch this intellectually cripple people. It intellectually cripples them. And I'm not going to sit by and let that happen, and I'm not going to sit by and watch what it does. So I would say that read this excellent article by Heather. Give us some comments. Where are you on this? This is what we should be talking about. But also we could do, I'm sure Heather would agree with me, with different interpretations of what we're seeing in her recent open statements in public. I think that's enough food for today. I'll see you later. Bye.